say action.
Okay, we're live.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone. We will call to order this meeting of the Finance Committee for Tuesday, March 19th. Thank you all for being here early, an hour early than we usually do. We'll start with the roll call, Bill.
Okay, Wilkos,
Here.
Anira,
Here.
Larman,
Here.
and I know Jackson is here. Yes, everyone present.
On his way. Great. Thank you. Next item of business is the approval of the minutes. Are there any corrections to the minutes of our March 5th, 2024 Finance Committee meeting? Seeing no corrections, I will accept the minutes of the March 5th, 2024 Finance Committee meeting as circulated. Next item is the audit of the bills to be paid. Are there any additions, Bill?
No additions tonight.
Great. No additions. All right. Who would like to make a motion to approve the audit of the bills?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the audit of the bills to be paid signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Moving on to resolutions. We have three. The first one is Resolution 2024-13, declaring intent to assess costs of improvements for Lake Street and Dewey Court reconstructions. Comes to us from the Public Works Committee.
I'll move approval on behalf of Public Works.
And I will second that on behalf of Public Works. Any discussion? Matt, this doesn't need city attorney. Will you flag something as soon as we get to it?
Yes.
So that, okay, so that we can get the right motion. Okay. Hearing no discussion. All those in favor of approving Resolution 2024-13, declaring intent to assess costs of improvements for Lake Street and Dewey Court reconstruction, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Moving on to Resolution 2024-15, providing for the sale of approximately $4 million in general obligation promissory notes. This comes to us from staff. Bill, do you want to give us a?
Yeah, this item and the related item, Resolution 2024-16, are for the city's 2024 capital borrowing in the amount of $4 million included in the budget document. This is the first step in the process, and with the second resolution, that gives us some different options on how we can finalize the sale. We do have Brad Vigut from Baird here tonight, here to give a presentation on the financing plan, results of our Moody's rating, and the parameters resolution.
Welcome, Brad.
Thank you.
Can you make sure that microphone is on? Thank you.
Okay, good, thank you. I'll walk through the presentation packet that was included in your agenda packet and answer any questions. But first page of the presentation, there's just a brief update of the interest rate environment. The top line of this graph represents where interest rates were 1 year ago, back in March of 2023. And the solid blue line, that's about below the top line and above the bottom line, that represents rates as of about a week ago in the municipal marketplace. So interest rates have dropped a little bit. The short end of the yield curve is still a little bit higher than years, say, 3 through 5 and even out to year 10, and then rates accelerate from there. I put together a summary of the financing that you're considering this evening. This is a general obligation promissory note. That means that the city is pledging its taxing authority for the repayment of the debt, repayment of the note, and that's what the investors look to when determining interest rates. Issue size of $4 million, and this would fund the city's 2024 capital improvement program. A couple other highlights. This has a rapid amortization, a rapid repayment period. This is paid off within 8 years. And for communities similar to Middleton throughout the state, it's more common to see a 10-year repayment for this type of debt. So the 8-year repayment is a positive consideration by Moody's, the rating agency that rates the city's debt. And it also helps keep the total interest cost of the $4 million lower than it would be with a 10-year finance. I have an estimated interest rate here of 3.36%. That's a little bit conservative for budgeting purposes. Rates today, if this were locked in right now, would be probably closer to 3.05%, 3.1, right in that range. And then I've got some of the highlights on, would actually be the next resolution on your agenda, but it's just some of the parameters, should you decide to go that route for the next step of the financing. So in terms of the timeline on the following page, with your authorization tonight, this would go to the full council for consideration at their meeting. Baird, along with city staff, would continue to take steps to bring this issue to market. We've already met with Moody's Investor Service. In fact, they've affirmed the AA1 of the city. That's a second highest credit rating that Moody's issues. It's only one notch below the AAA. So it puts the city in a very elite group in terms of peers throughout the country, really. And the higher that bond rating, the lower the interest cost that would be ultimately be available for the city. Now, I understand there's some discussion that the council meeting on April 2nd may shift off of that date, and that's the reason for the two resolutions. I'll talk just a minute about that. The normal or typical process the city would follow year after year is to adopt the resolution that we're discussing right now. This is called a set sail resolution. It really directs Baird and staff to proceed with financing. And then at the April 2nd meeting, I would come back with what's called the award resolution. And the award resolution finalizes the interest rates, the terms. It has all of the final information on the financing. From there, we move to the closing. Closing is penciled in for April 23rd. That's the date that the funds would be wired to the city. Because there's discussion of changing that council meeting date from April 2nd, another alternative is to adopt a resolution that establishes the parameters for the issuance. And that's the next resolution on your agenda. It's a very narrow set of parameters. It talks about the maximum issue size, $4 million, a maximum interest rate. It allows for changing individual payments, principal payments, by a few $100,000 just to meet debt targets that we're aiming at. It establishes maximum issuance expense. So you're in no way abrogating your authority or your oversight of the debt issuance process, but you're just providing another alternative to finalize the terms. Reason for that is if you were to change your meeting date to say April 1st, that's the day after Easter. It would not be a good day to be in the market. There's going to be a lot of people, a lot of the buyers aren't going to be interested in buying bonds or notes that day. So if you have fewer, less demand, you're going to suffer in terms of interest rates. If you go to Wednesday, that would be fine. But then at this point, we really need to start dialing in on what specific date, are you interested in? So with the parameters resolution, if that's authorized tonight, we would still target April 2nd to award these notes. And like I said, I don't think we'd be anywhere near that maximum interest rate of 4% that's in the parameters resolution, probably be closer to 3.1, somewhere in 3.05. So it's just designed to give you the flexibility to get the projects funded and considering the alternative of shifting your council meeting date. There is a detailed financing plan that's included on the page after the timeline. This plan looks at the existing obligations of the city. It looks at this new issuance of $4 million, and there's a projection for the principal and interest repayment. And then there's also a placeholder for future financings. We've just built in annual borrowings of $4 million. We show some offsets from impact fees. And that what we're really trying to get to here is what's towards the right-hand side. It's the combined levy-supported debt service. That is the existing plus new plus hypothetical future debt service payments for the city. That's because we don't want to look at any one issue in isolation. One of the highlights I point out here, we have a nice drop in your debt service payments in 2027. And that would allow for, if you need to layer in other significant financings, there's room to layer that in without seeing a substantial spike in your debt service mill rate. So I'll just pause there. I'd be glad to go into more details if anyone wants or answer any questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Brad? I'm just wondering, how can we get even higher up in the tier of elite municipalities and get the AAA?
Yeah, a couple of things. what Moody's looks at is other communities that are rated AAA, and they'll establish medians for that. I'd look at the medians. One of the items they really focused on was the city's fund balance. And the AAA peers have fund balances closer to 60 to 80%, which is much higher than Middleton's. That's the primary driver, I think, that if it's really a goal of the city to get to that AAA, focusing on the fund balance would be an important step. A couple of the other things that Moody's cited, though, is the income ratio is about 130 to 180% in the AAA range. So the city is a little bit below that. And also, they'd like to see your long-term liability ratio reduced to right around 100% or even a little bit less. The long-term liability ratio, that's primarily debt, is what they're focusing on there. But the overall factor that would have the most significant impact is fund balance.
Thank you.
Can I just
Yes,
add
go ahead.
a comment on that? So when we talk about fund balance and percentages, we're often talking about unassigned fund balance in the general fund. Fund balance that is available for any future purpose, but it isn't earmarked for anything in particular. And we have a policy target of 2 to 4 months of operations, which is about 17 to 33%. When Moody's looks at their ratio, they look at that, but they also look at assigned fund balance. That is money that is not legally restricted, but it has been assigned for particular purposes. So for example, we set aside money for future payments of sick and vacation, accrued leave when an employee retires or leaves the city. That's part of our assigned fund balance, and that's added into the Moody's ratio. So I just didn't want you, when you're hearing that Moody's is looking at peers that are maybe in the 50 to 70% range, they're looking at different types of fund balance. Unassigned fund balance is an important component of that. So that's something we may want to look at of what level do we feel is appropriate? Do we want to consider trying to add to that over time to both provide additional reserves for the city as well as help with our Moody's rating in the future?
Yeah, I guess it just becomes a question of how important is that AAA versus AA. Is it that significant of a difference?
In interest rates today, it's about 0.1%.
Okay, please continue if you have.
That's really the extent of my presentation, so I'd be glad to answer any other questions you might have.
Does anyone have further questions? All right, thank you, Brad.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, but we need to pass both of these resolutions, correct?
Yeah,
It's not an
the
either
first
or.
one allowing for the set sale. The second one would be optional unless we're planning to move the council meeting to April 1st. If you want the flexibility that we could proceed with the sale, even if the council meeting moves, then we would adopt both resolutions.
I like the flexibility. So I'll be looking for a motion on this one and then the next one.
This is Wilkes. I'll make a motion. Can I do them both together? Right, to approve both resolution 2024-15 and 2024-16.
Thank you.
This is Jackson. I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, so the motion is to approve both resolution 2024-15, providing for the sale of approximately $4 million general obligation promissory notes, and resolution 2024-16, authorizing the issuance and establishing parameters for the sale of not to exceed $4 million general obligation promissory notes. All those in favor of approving the two resolutions signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Moving on to agreements and contracts, we have two. The first one is consideration and potential action on Capital Flight requested amendment to Specialized Aviation Service Operations, or SASO agreement. This comes to what, well, we approved this back in October and now it's back. So who would like to explain why this is back?
Sure, happy to. So after the council approved the agreement, we sent it over to Capital Flight for their review and execution. They came back and asked for the council and finance committee and council to consider a modification to a specific paragraph. It'd be paragraph 2A, which is rental occupancy charges. They're asking the council to consider striking that section. Basically, the paragraph as it reads in the document today is for the first 5 years of the 15-year contract, there is no rental charge from the city to the applicant. They're asking that, and then after that period, there would be the discussion of establishing a potential rental occupancy charge. they're asking the city to consider striking that section altogether so that there would not be any rental occupancy charge for the duration of the 15-year contract.
And to be more precise, there would be no chance of charging rental occupancy because it's not built into the contract for us to do that now.
It was in the previous iteration. I don't know that it was ever acted on before that, but that particular paragraph didn't change from the first iteration to the one that was approved by the council in October.
Yeah, I mean, the only aspect of it that did sort of change is that because you had a shorter term, it really was more of a, here's what we might talk about later, sort of a dynamic. Whereas when we changed the term to 15, but then left the 5-year rental occupancy charge provision, it kind of put them in a position of, well, you know, during my 15-year term, all of a sudden these new charges could come about. And so it just changes the dynamic of it slightly. They were never really, essentially the 5-year rental occupancy charges would have been only negotiated upon a renegotiation of another 5-year at the beginning of another term.
Mhm.
Here, it would kind of come up in the middle of their term. Now, that doesn't make it wrong for the city, but that's, I think, where they're coming from and where it does slightly change from the previous contract they had versus now.
And
Whether that's material to the council or not is another question.
well, I would say it's this provision that gave me comfort in extending the lease to 15 years. So it's kind of an either or situation. Either we keep it at a 5-year lease, which was not the request, it was to go to 15, or we not lock ourselves into a 15-year term with no opportunity to revisit the possibility of rental occupancy charges. And I would note that the Bureau of Aeronautics here in Wisconsin says for all leases, rates should be set so that they maximize revenue, and all lease agreements should contain an escalation clause, which allows the rate to be increased over the term of the lease. So we don't have a charge now, but it's certainly a 15-year lease with no opportunity to revisit our decision not to charge initially. I think it would not be a prudent thing to do. Also, you know, I noted Mr. Hofelt mentioned capital flights, taxable investments in property, and the volume of fuel purchases and hosting of a community gathering event. All those things can be brought up in 5 years when we get to the point of possibly negotiating occupancy charges. And then finally, I'll note that in the research I was doing, I saw that some FBOs and SASOs actually provide a small percentage of their profits to the owner of the airport. And so that was enlightening, something I found very interesting. Thoughts from the other council members?
I did research as well. I looked at a pier down the road, looked at Waukesha, looked at how they have agreements set up with their operators on site. And what they don't have is anything that's just blank and open. And I think that's where there's a problem with this. We're just saying, we'll raise your rates in 5 years, but we're not saying why. And I think I'm looking for, if there isn't the stomach to remove this, which I think it just shouldn't be in there, then what I'm looking for is, all right, we're going to leave something in there, then let's add to it. Why is it in there? What do we want? What do we expect to do? You know, with a set of expectations. So if we're going to come back to this person in 5 years and say, oh, we're going to charge you a rental, well, then why? And then that should be articulated here. To just leave it open, that means, well, we can come along for any reason and charge an occupancy rate. And keep in mind, you know, the airport's supposed to be an enterprise fund. It's supposed to be a place where we want to attract business, have business operators, want them to feel welcome there. And if we're going to have ambiguous language in a contract that just says we can come around anytime we want and just assess a fee, that's not good business practice. But if we have language in there that says we want to assess fees, but this is why, and here's a structure, and this is what it entails. I mean, why, so why would you do that? If it is to have escalating rates over time, because instead of renegotiating every 5 years, we're now going out to 15 years. Well, then maybe that's the language that needs to be in a 15-year agreement. But I don't think there needs to be surprises in it. So like this, just an open-ended, hey,
Well, I would disagree with the characterization that this says we're just going to start charging after 5 years, because that is not at all what it says. It says rental occupancy charges shall be a subject for discussion between Middleton and operator at the conclusion of the first 5 years. It doesn't say shall be charged. That would be different. I also would note that I asked specifically when we considered changing the term from 5 years to 15, whether rental occupancy charges had been a subject for discussion, because it says shall, so that means it should be, and it wasn't. So based on past performance, I don't think the SASO has anything to worry about. I think this is about as vague and I don't want to say meaningless because it does give us, I mean, I'm willing to put in the words, the possibility of a rental occupancy charge shall be a subject, if you really want to make it that tentative. But you're right, the airport is an enterprise fund. The golf course is an enterprise fund and pays for its operations. The airport is a long way from being able to do that. And again, I'll go back to my comfort in approving a 15-year term goes directly to this particular paragraph, giving us an opportunity to revisit the terms, at least of a occupancy charge after 5 years.
okay, well, I understand where you're coming from, but I'm saying I'm looking at other airports that have more operators and more SASOs on their premises, and they don't have anything like this in it. Their contracts are much more specific with more expectations. So and that's all I'm saying, is if we're going to do something, then let's put something in there that sets expectations as opposed to just something that's open-ended.
So what would you base those expectations on? Other airports, or is there data that we have that can say like, this is what we could be charging for rental occupancy?
No, I don't have, I don't have any.
So I think
I'm-
that's, I mean,
I'm looking at other airports and their contracts and their agreements, and, and maybe we just need to have more modern language or something in there that reflects the long-term objectives of what we expect then of our tenant. But just leaving it the way this language is, to me, it seems like after, the city could say, well, okay, you've been there for 5 years and I don't know, you're a burden on the community. You're a bad actor. We're tired of fixing things you break. So we're going to start assessing a rental fee on you.
And that's a problem because?
Well, then the language should be there. Then that's what it should say. I mean, why we're going to do it if we're going to do it.
But it's a discussion. It shall be a subject for discussion. And to be honest, it sounds like you're more concerned about protecting the finances of the SASO than you are protecting the city's financial position. And
I'm trying to encourage the SASO to make a long-term commitment to build and develop. This same SASO is building and developing in Waukesha, putting in an operation, putting in a restaurant, building a larger facility. And so clearly, whatever's going on in Waukesha, maybe is a little bit more friendly environment to grow and develop. And if this is an enterprise and we want to encourage development at the airport, then we need to make ourselves available to that. If we're just going to shut down a business that wants to grow and develop out here, then I think we're moving in the wrong
I
direction.
reject that claim. And again, I'll say this is wording that was in the first, it was in the previous agreement, the one that's about to expire.
But
And
look at
so,
the history of why the
but
business came to us
if
and
I
asked
could-
for a 15-year was,
if I could finish my thought,
okay.
the fact that this was in the previous agreement tells me it was acceptable to the Sasso at some point. And I
agree, for
See,
5
no-
years, but not for 15.
Can you remind me why they requested the change of the term? Because I cannot recall.
They wanted the certainty so that they could be able to raise money to do things like improve, their facilities, which that made sense to build in a 15-year term.
I think Brian has some input.
That's what I was going to say. It's based on their ability to raise capital for improvements.
Alder Jackson.
My thing is, when I look at this, I agree with Alder Lorman. It's just too open-ended for me. When I received the packet, I read it at home and I said, this is like me leasing an apartment and the landlord just coming and putting this clause in here and not telling me, okay, we can come back and revisit, say, like David Lorman said, you did damage, you did this, that, and the other. Here's $1,000 tab on that. I didn't expect $1,000 tab. It's just too open-ended. And I think it comes from the experience of dealing with my sister's kitchen when she went into trying to go into an apartment development, and she was comfortable with the rent and she knew what she needed to do. But then when the lease came, she said the wordage and the verbiage was just heinous. And we ended up losing the business because of that. She went elsewhere because this apartment development had a 10-year, and like David said, 5 compared to 15 years, had a 10-year lease, and I want this and I want that, and it's subject to change, and this is what you need to pay at the end of the year. Whoa, pump your brakes. Hold on a minute. So I think it's just, the wordage is just too open-ended. It's just because we can, and I understand what Alder Hanara is saying, we can have a discussion, but the discussion may go in our favor and not their favor, and that's just not fair, and we're not here to lose businesses.
Well, given that 2 members feel there should be additional language, I'm inclined to refer this to the Airport Commission and ask for that language to come back. What you specifically feel would be sufficient language to protect the city's interests and the operator's interests.
With the ultimate goal that this enterprise fund becomes a self-sustaining fund.
Well, I think at this point, I'd put it to the Common Council and ask them to vote to whether to keep that language or not.
You don't think that the Airport Commission would be able to come up with suitable language that would protect both the airport and the city?
Well, I mean, the operator is requesting that it be removed. And if the Common Council votes on it to either strike it or keep it, at that point, he still has the option to accept it or not accept it. I mean, he doesn't want the language there. So
But would he accept some language like you're proposing?
I don't know. Maybe not.
Well, what I'm trying to do is reach a compromise between protecting the city's interests and protecting the operator's
What
interests.
kind of language would you like to see in there?
I'm not the one I like the language that is proposed to be struck. So that's why I'm asking. Both my colleagues have indicated some sort of reducing the uncertainty would make you consider more favorably leaving in the possibility of rental occupancy charges in the future. And I'm just wondering what specifically could we do to this paragraph to make it acceptable, to reach a compromise?
Well, right. So without it going to the commission for more discussion and ideas and input, I don't know. So,
Does our city attorney have
I mean, do we want to hear from Matt Hofeld directly?
No?
Okay.
Yeah,
Wondering if there's anything in the prior language, Matt, that can be referred to?
well, not really, because as I said, the existing or the previous agreement was only a 5-year term, and we simply said, well, after the 5-year term, maybe we'll talk about it when it's renewed. So what's being asked for is a longer term, so they know they've got X number of years to make whatever investments and get the return they want. And I think with some merit, this creates some uncertainty of whether they really have a 15-year term. So we turn around and decide, oh, well, we need X number of dollars now in occupancy charges, and that changes your whole, you can't rely on that as a business to go forward. So, what kind of it'd be helpful if we kind of had an idea, what might we charge? Do we have any limits, an upper limit as to what that might be? What kind of things might trigger
Right.
wanting, it just comes down to, for their side, what's the certainty? And for our side is, do we want to protect? And so a lot of your arguments, I think, suggest that really a 15-year agreement is too long in your view, because you don't want to bind the city to a contract whereby we're not getting any occupancy charges for that long. So there's a number of different ways you could maybe meet in the middle, either changing the terms, creating some kind of upper limit as to what occupancy charges would be, certain conditions under which they would be charged. But somebody has to know what is the next 15 years going to look like, so I know how much I can put into this business, I think is where.
Okay, well, does paragraph 30 amendments, does this make anyone less alarmed? All actions seeking amendment of this agreement shall be in writing approved by both parties. And actually, it says the Middleton Airport Commission shall be charged with jurisdiction to review any requests to amend this agreement. So this should have gone before the Airport Commission.
This current iteration of
The
the,
one I'm looking at now.
Well, it hasn't been signed yet, so it's not.
Right, but that was probably, I'm guessing it was in the original.
I mean, I assumed that this would happen. This is. the
Right,
normal
that's
part.
what I
Yeah, like,
assumed too.
so, but I mean, I guess it comes down to the question of, will you sign a contract before you know the terms of what might be amended later? Well, I mean, that's not what I meant to say. That came out wrong. I mean, I can understand needing some assurance that you're not going to be caught out of the blue. I don't know.
Can we add language about mutually agreed upon to the paragraph about?
I would suggest that that's maybe not protecting the city that much, because, I mean, if I'm a business, I've got a
Well,
15-year
okay.
lease, I wouldn't agree to
But we
any
can't
occupancy
have
charges.
it both ways.
No, you can't. It comes
It's
down,
either-
how comfortable are we, how far out are we comfortable going with a certain set of terms is really what it comes down to. And, setting an agreement out for certain amount of time, but then saying, hey, we might want to come back and renegotiate this during that period, is not typically how you write lease. You want to know what's going to happen during the term that you have. And if that time horizon for what the terms are is too long for us, well, then that time horizon needs to be shorter, but of course, understanding.
I'm willing to go back to a 5-year term.
But I think that's how they probably effectively look at leaving that language in, is this being effectively a 5-year term, because if they don't know what the occupancy charges are going to be in 5 years, if any, then what do you do planning wise?
Now we have a land lease in place for that, separate of the SASO agreement. So, there's two moving pieces here. There's a land lease already for that property. This is the SASO agreement. So this is, another agreement on top of that, so they can operate their business. I mean, that's fine. We can throw it back to the Airport Commission for certainly some discussion and review. I think it would be nice, obviously, if the Airport Commission has some input from the city, some direction and some thoughts. I would absolutely think that would be welcome. And that's really about,
And that's kind of what I'm comfortable with, throwing it back to the Airport Commission. Because just like Matt said, and I wasn't here in October, but this was agreed upon on a 5-year term. Now you're stretching it out to 15. I think it needs to go back to the Airport Commission, get some wordage that makes the city as well as the SASO comfortable.
That would make me comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going back to 5 years, I think, is off the table. I mean, I looked at what the other, airport down the road's doing, and they don't have anything at a 5-year. They're much longer term agreements.
And if there's language
you-
in that that's more concrete that the airport commission is willing to consider for this agreement, then I think
Right.
you should
I
bring that forward and.
I mean, it was just written differently. It had a lot of different language in it in terms and conditions, but I didn't find anything where, it just said, oh, midterm, we can discuss charging you open-ended fees. Those,
It doesn't say that, though. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just can't.
I don't know, that's the way I
abide by
interpret it. I'm sorry.
Mischaracterization of what the language says.
If it
It's
says-
actually
if-
pretty vague.
Right.
Subject for discussion.
that's right, subject for discussion. And in 5 years, there are different people, different terms, different times, different conditions, and a common council, anybody could say, hey, we want to start assessing them fees. I mean, because it's truly at the will of the city, the common council here.
The
That's
owner of the airport.
Right, the city. It's at the will of the city. So 5 years into a 15-year contract, the city can come and say, hey, we want to charge you some additional occupancy rates. And why? Well, now we have reason. I don't know. There was a storm. We had to fix stuff. We're having to shovel more snow. We're tired of cleaning up after your mess. I don't know. It could be any reason to start assessing a fee. And I think that's just too open. And do we do that with other businesses and vendors and people that the city engages with, that we have agreements and contracts with? Are they open-ended where we say, hey,
I don't think we have any 15-year agreements with, I think 10 years with the
Okay, well,
Pelletier is about
do we have it
longest.
with our 10-year agreements? Doesn't matter. Do we have it with a 2-year, 3-year? It's irrelevant in terms of time. Do we have any agreements with the city, with other vendors and services and people that say, okay, let's sit down and talk, and maybe we'll discuss some additional fees. But we don't say why.
Does someone want to make a motion to refer this to the airport commission?
I would
for-
like to make a motion that we refer the SASO agreement as it currently stands to the airport commission for further review
This is Jackson. I'll second it.
and amendments.
I'll second the amendment.
All right. And Alder Lorman, you said you wanted some direction, so I guess
Sure.
the direction I'm looking for is a compromise between the two parties so that we're both protected, because something may come up, whether or not it's the operator's fault or, anything the operator has done. There may be circumstances under which we might need to charge a rental occupancy charge.
Fair enough.
And yet I get that the operator wants to have some certainty, at least beyond 5 years, what his costs will be. So if there's language in other agreements that can be pulled in, as Alder Wokus mentioned, I think that would be great. But the bottom line is trying to, we did the right thing by our SASO by extending this 5-year agreement to 15 years. And now we're looking for some gesture of good faith on his part to let us keep this in here with some very specific terms about how that discussion would take place.
Yeah, okay. And I appreciate our attorney's, consultation on this. And perhaps whatever we come up with, you look at it again and, I'm always okay with a middle ground, and your assessment of it, I think, in my opinion, pointed out that, well, there isn't really a middle ground in the way this is written right now. So
Okay.
I could look at it again. Okay, thank
All
you.
right. All those in favor of the motion to refer the capital flight requested amendment for Specialized Aviation Services Operations Agreement to the Airport Commission for review and amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Moving on to our second agreement, the agreement with Vanderwall and Associates for consultant services for subdivision ordinance rewrite. This comes to us from the Plan Commission. And before anyone makes a motion, I will note that Bill or Brian, whoever's got the controls, if you would scroll down to page 62 of the document. Okay, the first bullet under work element 5, Vanderwall. Okay, so Vanderwall is the consultant who did our zoning code rewrite. And at the Plan Commission meeting, when this came up, I expressed my disappointment that we were surprised to learn about the need for a second hearing on the zoning code. It seemed to me that would be part of the consultant's responsibilities to work with the staff up front, to outline exactly what we needed to do to get to the end of the project. So I asked for some wording to be added to this agreement related to all the steps. We need them to tell us upfront what all the steps are. So I'm going to propose that this be reworded because I feel like the procedural steps, being provided with the procedural steps, that really goes at the beginning of the work. It should be in work element 1, project orientation, because it's orienting us to what we need to be doing. And then I would also note that there is no chapter 263 in Wisconsin statutes. It's actually chapter 236. So with that, the part about preparing the public hearing draft land division ordinance, that's fine staying there. But the part about providing staff with all the procedural steps, and, you know, they didn't even need to put those 3 sub bullets in, but that part should be part of work element 1, in my opinion.
So you're looking like for maybe an additional bullet point saying advise as to all.
I would just add to work element 1, a 3rd bullet saying, Vanderwall and Associates provide staff with all the procedural steps associated with the adoption of a new land division ordinance in compliance with state statutes and site 263. I mean, 236 instead of 263. So would anyone like to make a motion to approve this agreement with that amendment?
Does city staff have any thoughts, input on this? Okay.
I'll make a motion that we approve the agreement with the changes as indicated.
This is Jackson, I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I had a question for Abby, thumbs up or down. Will it really take a year?
Probably so because of the committee review process. Vanderwall also is including Strand Engineering as a subcontractor. So with staff coordination and other staff priorities, and then the need to review different drafts, I think a year is reasonable.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when I asked that, I wasn't sure if I was hopeful or disappointed.
Or maybe you wanted a break from long plan commission agendas.
Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the agreement with Vanderwall and Associates for consultant services for subdivision ordinance rewrite as amended by our city attorney, or to be amended by the city attorney as discussed, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Moving on to budget, we have one item, identify additional funding for 2024 reconstruction of Lake Street and Dewey Court. This comes to us from Public Works. And I will say that Alder Wokus and I are both on the Public Works Committee. We were in a discussion at our meeting last Monday about, we definitely want to go forward with this reconstruction project. We don't want to postpone any of the other projects related to roads. And we knew there was some funding that we could put towards this shortfall. So instead of asking the Public Works Committee to plow through all this and come up with an idea, we decided to punt it to the Finance Committee. So that's where we are. And Bill and Sean, would you two care to talk about what some options are?
Yeah, I could start, and then John, please add. So included in the staff summary in the packet is listing some alternatives. There's an identified shortfall of about 462,000 based on the estimates. There's been some discussion of having the Lake Edge portion funded using park development funds, which would be about 210,000. And then there was an identification of other street resurfacing projects that could potentially be delayed. There is an unallocated capital carryover amount of 100,000, a portion of which or all of which could be allocated. And then the additional idea that was put into the memo for consideration was potentially reassigning the capital carryover that was recently approved for the Graber Pond elevation control project. That's about 242,000, and potentially funding that project through the stormwater utility, given that stormwater utility currently has strong cash balances in part because of FEMA reimbursement that they have received for projects that were initially funded with stormwater utility fees while we were going through the FEMA reimbursement process, and now we've received that reimbursement of funds from FEMA.
Okay, thank you.
And-
Sean, do you have anything to add?
I'll just add that I appreciate Bill's thinking of that because I did not.
No, that's great. So it sounds like if we use the unallocated, I see Kylie's here. Is it okay with parks to put the $210,000 for the park development into that fund?
They did have discussion at the last night's PRFC meeting, and they did motion and approve to allocate the 210 from the park development. They were very reluctant with that decision, and wanted to communicate that they didn't make the decision on the use of it being a kayak launch, but they felt like their hands were tied in that decision. But that's what was communicated from the Parks Board last night.
Okay, I appreciate your candor. So with that 210,000, that leaves how much to fill, Bill?
Approximately 252,000.
And we have 242,000 for the Graber Pond elevation control project, which would still go forward just with a different funding source, correct?
Correct. And if that is the direction coming out tonight, we could draft this in the form of a budget
Yep.
amendment for formal action.
And so that would leave just under $10,000 out of our 10,000, or I'm sorry, 100,000 unallocated capital fund.
That'd be correct, yes.
Okay.
Wait, how much was that from the capital? Can you say that number again?
It would be, I think, $9,743.
I think that's correct. Yeah. At this point,
9,743? Oh, okay.
I believe we do not have bids yet. These are engineers' estimates, so the amounts are likely going to change to some degree, but based on what we know today, correct.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the other really fair point. This is just based on an estimate from a design. April 4th, we're intending to open bids. We would need a budget amendment anyway that takes the form of a resolution to be approved by a supermajority of the council. I would think if we could schedule that for April 16th with bid award, we'll have both funding and bid award locked up at the same finance and council meetings, and we'll know the number at that point.
All right. Well, that's good. So Bill, what action do you need us to take tonight? Do we make a recommendation to council to go with this approach to filling the gap?
I think there could be a recommendation to council for staff to proceed with this approach. And that would give us the direction to prepare the budget amendment, as Sean indicated, and based on the final bid results.
Okay. And that would be considered at the April 16th meeting?
Correct. Yep.
Have to prepare, okay. All right, I will work with you in the break to get
Okay.
the motion. But by consensus, do we agree, Finance Committee members, that this is a good way to do it?
I don't know. We're taking all this money from other sources this early in the game to do this. I guess I just have some questions. You know, parks are reluctantly giving up money over this. And why did this shortfall come up now? I mean, why does it have to be done now? At the sacrifice of other taking money from other projects and development.
Sure. Number one, I would say that the capital budget was funded based on a ballpark guess of the overall road. This started as a water main project.
Right.
It mushroomed to including a sewer project, and it grew to include a complete wholesale redevelopment
Yep.
of the lake edge.
Yeah, that I get.
So the budget was already approved, and then we set the scope. And that's abnormal for us, but we've already been working with our 5-year plan, pushing things back and forth, and the water main out there just keeps breaking. So it became sort of a high priority road project from a water main perspective that grew into something else. And that's why our budgeting is so wildly off on this.
Yeah. No, I mean, I absolutely understand addressing infrastructure, water main, and road repair. But then, you know, it became a highly charged project, you know, from the removal of the boat ramp and just all the reconfiguration that went in down there. And so here we are down the road needing $462,000 as a result of this redesign project. And we're taking money away from other sources when the city's committed to having a complete streets program. And here we are wanting to take money away to stay on track with our street repair and street maintenance. So I guess I'm just being the canary in the coal mine and saying, you know, I told you so kind of a scenario. Because in a month from now, 2 months from now, 3 months from now, are we going to be then short on money for other projects? This is a lot of money.
Sure. And I
gonna-
think,
I'm
Oh,
going to
go
jump
ahead.
in.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Thank you. And the reason is every year that we worked on Middleton Beach Road, I'm going to use that as an example. There were changes in the 5 years where we worked with Sean and his team, and I have to tell you, they were very patient in his shop, but the cost kept changing. And when I would see it in council, even other roads, it does kind of ebb and flow. You know, we do our best to guess. But I think MBR was $1 million to do the road, and we were thinking more like 700,000. And so it's just a road, but there was a water main. And then we were trying to divot towards the creek. So we were trying to do some good things. But the reason I give that example is that if you don't have that 5-year look back to know there kind of are flows to some of these projects, it's more routine. And I am grateful that Bill thought of the Graber Pond Elevation Control Project as an option to move funds, you know, to open up that source. And the reason is something like Graber Pond, we should be utilizing that pool first to make sure we get other things done. So I think sometimes it's hard, but if you know, I would say the city has been working on, you're probably in year 7 of your 5-year plan of roads, and you've really done a ton of these roads. And so I think that's why I'm kind of used to the drumbeat. having been around just a little bit longer. So I'm glad that you're doing the Canary. I'm glad that you're reminding us, keep reminding us. We want to stay focused on the tax dollar, but on this one, it feels like a rhythm. Every so often a road, goes a little bit and we just got to be a little creative to get there. And they usually come back in and reconfigure their budget. So I've been impressed for the last 5 years of the work that they've done.
Well, and part of this scope change included sidewalks on both sides of the street. So that's part of what we're looking at here too is, I mean, you talk about complete streets and that went into this. It does have a cost.
And the other projects, I mean, the other road projects were preserving by not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was a big goal that I heard at Public Works Committee is let's not move from one road fund to a different
Right.
road fund, but find a different way.
Yeah.
That has a cost.
And without having watched the Parks meeting, I guess I'm a little confused as to why the Parks Commission wasn't more supportive, considering I think they approved the plan to go forward with the new Lake End Park or whatever it's going to be called. So that's a little surprising. Alder Bogus.
To that end, which I think was Alder Lorman's most concern was the fact that there was reservation. So there's 210,000 from Park Development. How much is in that fund right now? Do you know?
Approximately 2 million.
Oh, okay. Then never mind. No further questions. So if my thought process was we do have the Parisi Park rebuild. There are some things that I don't think have gone out for bid yet, correct? Or do we have bids on those yet?
Not for parking. Not for park development. The only thing that we have was the boat launch and then also Parisi Park potentially.
Right. And that's still potentially.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought that was.
I just have to talk with the city attorney on that, on funding for that a little bit more. So,
Okay.
yay,
Got you.
surprise.
Okay.
Surprises.
So I guess there's still some question, but the fact that the fund is well funded, it gives
Yeah.
me some faith that Parisi can still go forward
Yes.
despite this diversion.
My question is from Parks, I mean, where was your stance on the decision that you guys made? I mean, what was your thought process in making this decision?
My thought, our
Parks.
park, okay.
Okay.
Their thought process on making the decision for the funding
Yes.
piece. I just kind of explained, I guess, is that the direction that they originally wanted to go was have a little bit more say in making that roof's decision on it being boat launch facility. I don't think they were 100%, but they did approve the plan a couple months ago in December, and then it did approve it again last night. So, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so do you want Alder Bogus, do you want to?
Do we need a motion on this or or is it just a recommendation from us?
I think it could be a motion to direct staff to prepare
An amendment?
a budget amendment for this project, 23-122 to allocate.
To allocate 210,000 from the park development funds, 100,000 from.
Nope, 200.
Yeah. If I may, I've got a
Okay, you've got it.
suggestion written out if you want to consider that. Direct staff to prepare a budget amendment resolution to provide additional funding for the reconstruction of Lake Street and Dewey Court based on actual bid results using a combination of park development funds for the lake edge up to 210,000, reallocation of Graber Pond elevation control carryover in the amount of 242,257, and additional unallocated capital carryover as needed.
With the understanding that the Graber Pond project will be funded through stormwater. I don't want to
Okay.
have that misunderstood.
The only modification I would suggest is instead of referencing up to $210,000, just saying as bid, right? That allocation. seems
Okay. I
fair.
wasn't sure if the bid results would be broken down by area of the project.
They
if that
should,
could
they
potentially
should be
change.
identifiable. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So if it turns into 211, we don't have to sweat.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so that is the motion that,
I will make that motion as Bill has stated.
This is Jackson. I'll second.
okay. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the motion to direct staff to do the budget, prepare the budget amendment as Bill described, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Now we move on to miscellaneous. We have two items, starting with the stormwater utility rate study. Who wants to tee this off? I see the chair of Stormwater Utility Board is here, and so is Eric Sorensen. Who wants to start?
Yeah, just as way as a quick introduction to this item, the city stormwater utility was established with a per ERU fee of $15. The current fee that has been charged the last 5 years is at $45. That was increased following a referendum to provide additional funding for a 5-year period in response to the flooding in 2018. That is due to sunset at the end of this year. At the direction of the council, staff has prepared a rate study to look at potential options for an additional referendum that would take place later this year to potentially increase that fee level going forward to cover additional items within the stormwater utility, both for capital projects as well as maintenance of stormwater.
Yeah, I don't have a presentation, but I will take questions. Stormwater Utility Board looked at this last month and they were pretty supportive of it at the $92 ERU rate. It's right in line with our neighboring communities, if not cheaper. I think it's a pretty good representation of what we're going to need moving forward.
Okay. Does anyone have questions for Eric? Or like I said, we have the chair of SWUB in the room. I have a couple of questions and comments. So currently we have around 20,000 ERUs, is that correct? Or that's what the 92 is based
I
on?
use that as a projection of the near future. We have like 19,400, I think.
Okay. But we can't increase this utility rate without a referendum, correct?
That's
Um,
my understanding, right, Matt?
I think so, yeah. That's kind of the
Unless
path
we-
we set ourselves on.
Okay, unless we offset it with a reduction in the levy.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And the reason I asked that is because 92 is the rate we should be charging now, but 5
Right.
years from now, it will not be the rate we should be charging. And so did the utility board discuss at all, maybe nudging that up a little bit to build in for future inflation?
Counting on Bill to analyze if that needs to happen. Like he said before, we do have a healthy balance right now, so we can kind of coast, so to speak. Bill, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I can add to that. So the last page of the study, the Stormwater Capital Improvement Plan, lists potential projects and timelines. I did look at the current balance within the stormwater utility, including the FEMA reimbursement that we have received and that's still pending, and then projected out these capital projects, this level of funding, and I put, just for planning purposes, a 3% inflation. I don't know if that's going to be sufficient to cover all of these, but at least with that assumption and the new ERU fee at $92, there would be sufficient balance to cover this list of major maintenance projects listed out through 2033. There would not be funding for the stormwater improvement projects listed below the line, and I believe those were not included in the analysis for the $92.
They are not.
That would have the effect of drawing down that balance that we have from the FEMA reimbursement over time, but there would be projected sufficient funds to cover these projects and the operating costs as listed in the study.
So 92 is the proposal. And Bill or Brian, when does council need to approve the question that will go on the ballot in November?
I'd have to check the calendar from the state, but typically it's about 2-3 months out from the election at which the question is going to be at. So to be on the safe side, we'd like to have the question settled, probably around May, so that we kind of know what it is and can figure out what sort of public information needs to be done on the question prior to November.
Okay.
Now we have a communication specialist to help us.
To communicate the facts, but we also have the Friends of Pheasant Branch who are, I think, very eager to, on their own, communicate do the advocacy. So
Yeah, that's just a good clarification. As with all referendum questions, city staff can only provide factual information on what the question is, and what a yes versus what a no means. But in terms of any sort of advocacy for the question or against the question, city staff cannot be involved in that conversation.
But in a technical type of referendum as this is, I think that's a
right,
very valuable thing.
and the facts are almost the advocacy.
Chair?
Yes, go ahead. Oh, yes. Could you please at the microphone, Jim?
Thanks, I appreciate it. Just real quick. I spoke to you at the committee of the whole a while back. I'd like to recommend or suggest that if you do forward this to council, we not lock in on a dollar amount with that motion. In other words, let that be figured out by a little more time to come up with that before we lock in a number. So if you're in favor of forwarding this to council and recommending a referendum, it wouldn't lock us into a number at this point in time.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. One piece of factual information that I think the city should gather is how many acres of conservancy land do we have to protect compared to our peer cities, and how much property value are we trying to protect compared to our peer cities? Because I think if this 92 amount, even if we don't settle on that one, is still lower than most of our peers. And something tells me we have, I don't want to say more at stake, but if you look at the cost per acre of conservancy lands or just property value, residential or commercial, I think I'd like to see what those numbers look like. Okay. So this is on the council's agenda, yes?
This is not on the council for
Oh,
tonight.
okay.
This was just a first introduction to finance.
All right,
thought
do you
this would
Do you
come back.
need an action from us to,
If you'd like it to be on a future council agenda, it'd be fine to refer to council and pick your meeting date that you wanted at.
I like that idea, meeting date, April 16th?
I mean, the sooner the better.
Okay, April 2nd.
May is only like.
Yeah, I mean. we
Okay.
want-
Do you want to make a motion to,
May is like way.
Well, I'm just saying, whatever sooner than later means is, so, because I think because we are going to be asking, for referendum. So if we can get out ahead of it sooner than later, that's all.
okay.
16th makes sense.
You want to,
Brian, scheduling, what are you comfortable with?
Yeah, Bill and I were just trying to figure out the flow of the next couple of meetings. I think for now, the 16th makes sense. And if there's a reason to move it up, we'll do so with your authorization. But as of now, let's plan on the 16th.
okay, or you could say no later than April 16th. They
Okay,
could
so,
settle on the 2nd.
so we'd like to put this before the comment, go to the first page so I can.
So basically a recommendation.
Recommendation of the Common Council that for April 16th, we review the stormwater utility rate study.
This is Wilkes, I'll second.
Okay.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Moving on to our second item for just the Finance Committee, and that is the tax increment financing policy review, staff presentation and discussion and potential recommendation by Finance Committee. And this comes to us from us. I do see I have a public comment registration form, but we don't have public comments. Advice from staff on this?
It's, the body's prerogative to decide if you want to allow public comment during an actual agenda item. So if the body was
All right, we'll
comfortable with
wait
that,
and
you
hear
could do
from
that.
staff first. Okay.
All right. Thank you. At the February 6th Finance Committee meeting, the committee had expressed some interest in reviewing the city's TIF policy, which was first adopted by the council in early 2020. It was amended once in late 2022, and that was to clarify language around green roofs and the definition of what constituted a green roof, but there hasn't been a full review of the policy since it was initially adopted. The TIF policy is based on the approved project plans for TIF District 3 and TIF District 5, which are the two active TIF districts that we have in the city currently. So we're going to provide a presentation which kind of goes through what we look at currently and how we look at projects as they align with the current policy. And then we'll open it up for questions, and we're also open to doing any additional research that you want us to prepare for your next meeting or for a future meeting. So for starters, just a brief overview. TIF and TID are sometimes used interchangeably, but TIF is tax increment financing, which is the financing tool, and TID is the tax increment district, which is the geographic area that is covered by the financing tool. When a TID is created, the current base value of the property continues to be available for all 4 of the taxing jurisdictions. 100% of the tax on new value, which is called the value increment, is retained by the city for projects that can be used within the TID or in some limited circumstances within 1/2 mile of the TID, as long as they benefit the district. Upon closure of the district, 100% of the full value and presumably the substantially increased full value is available for all of the taxing jurisdictions. And in Wisconsin, TIF is the primary economic development tool that we have available. And in many cases, municipalities are limited by state statute as to what we can require for, especially as it relates to private development. But TIF offers a carrot or an incentive when we want to promote a certain policy goal that the city has, but it's not something that we can require a private developer to do. TIF is an opportunity to incentivize that to help meet city goals. If you go to the next slide, this slide is from the Department of Revenue, and it essentially illustrates what I just discussed. And it shows with the green arrow at the bottom, when a TID is created, the base value, which is the lighter colored green box to the left, is still split amongst Dane County, the Middleton Cross Plains School District, Madison College, and the city. But for the life of that district, from the bottom green arrow to the red arrow on the right, when the TID is terminated, all of the tax value is reflected in the green triangle. All of that is available just to the city to use within the TIF district. And then once that TID is terminated, you can see that the taxing jurisdictions each get their share of the taxes, and those values are increased if the TIF is working as it's supposed to. The but-for requirement is a really key concept when we talk about TIF, and it's required by state statute that the city evaluate every new TIF district that's created based on the but-for test. So the city has a joint review board, which is a 5-member board. It's made up of representatives of each of the 4 taxing jurisdictions and then 1 additional citizen member, so 5 members total. And when they are approving a new TID, they have to look at, would the development occur without the use of TIF? Are the economic benefits greater than the costs? Do the benefits outweigh the value of tax increments? but for should also be looked at with each project that comes forward for consideration by the city. So it's not just at the stage where we're approving a new TIF district and a new project plan, but it should be evaluated for each individual project. So the city should be looking at, is this project feasible without TIF assistance? Would TIF assistance allow for a higher or better use of the property? And what level of TIF assistance is appropriate? Some examples of eligible TIF expenditures by state statute and also through the city's project plans. Eligible costs would include infrastructure, land acquisition, professional services, private development incentives, administrative costs, and certain costs within the half-mile boundary if they are clearly delineated in the approved project plan. Examples of costs that would not be eligible for TIF assistance are most municipal and school facilities, general government operating expenses, improvements that do not benefit property within the TID, and cash grants that don't have a development agreement associated with them. This is just the current TIF District 3 map. TID 3 was created in 1993 and is scheduled to close in 2030, possibly earlier if the council directs an earlier closure. The end of the expenditure period for this district is in 2025. You can see that this district covers the municipal airport, most of the Airport Road Business Park area, Greenway Station and Greenway Center, some of the Parmenter corridor, and all of downtown Middleton. And then TIF District 5 is scheduled to close in 2036 with the end of the expenditure period in 2031. Covers the Bell Farm development area, most of the land between the Beltline and Parmenter Street, the Pheasant Branch Conservancy Creek corridor, the commercial area that is near the intersection of Allen Boulevard and Century Avenue in the northeast part of the city. And then you can see through a recent amendment, the city was able to get this TIF district extended to a small part of the University Avenue corridor, which has been a key redevelopment area for the city. We did that by going through property that is tax exempt, which is a little bit easier for the city to do right now because we are over the 12% valuation limit by the state for the total valuation that we can have within a TID. So one of my favorite things about how the city of Middleton can use TIF as somebody who works on both long-range planning and economic development is that it really provides an opportunity for our community to decide what its most important priorities and policy values are, and then to reflect that through the policy and through the individual decisions that are made for providing TIF assistance. So every community is different. Every community has different assets, a different market, although our market obviously is quite similar to most of the rest of Dane County, but every community has its own policy priorities. And so I tried to provide some examples of other Dane County communities and where they had a TIF policy available that they were willing to publicly share. I've linked to that in your packet within the memo. So I have City of Sun Prairie, City of Fitchburg, and City of Madison included there. I also got a chance to talk with City of Monona yesterday, and they do not have a formal TIF policy. They shared that their elected body is interested in looking at adopting a policy like Middleton's, especially to encourage sustainability. In Monona, it's the Community Development Authority that is reviewing TIF applications. And they typically focus on things like soil challenges, contamination, and site-specific issues for TIF. Monona is strictly redevelopment. They're landlocked, so all of their projects are redevelopment projects. They do not specifically prohibit parking. I know parking was a recent topic of discussion in TIF considerations, but they said that generally speaking, they would like to see other site-specific reasons when they're providing assistance. So those are just a few examples that we were able to gather from other communities. When I was reviewing the TIF policies that we had from other communities, these are a few of the items that jumped out at me as far as like where we are differentiating ourselves. These are numbered from our TIF policy. So number 2, fostering the creation and retention of jobs. That's very commonly in many, many TIF policies. But where we have differentiated ourselves is that we list quality jobs for all individuals of all backgrounds and abilities. Item number 6 is incentivizing the development of a range of workforce housing options to close the affordability gap. That is becoming more common in other TIF policies, but I know that when the city first started incentivizing workforce housing, we were one of the first in the state. We were certainly one of the first in the state to establish a program where we were providing an incentive for projects that were not receiving any other subsidy like LIHTC or a 4% tax credit, where we were the sole source of subsidy, making up the difference in rents. And about 10 years ago, I spoke at a WEDA conference on this topic and spoke to many other communities, and we were really one of the first that was doing that. Item number 7 in our policy is mitigating climate change, and that has really been an emphasis of our Common Council, and that's reflected in our policy. And there are some other communities now in Dane County that are starting to look at that as well. And then livability and just general quality of life issues have been reflected more in our policy through looking at enhancements to the urban greenway, multimodal transportation, aesthetics and streetscaping, public art, and then boosting stormwater management capabilities. Those are all items that were a little bit different from how other communities are looking at TIF. So this is just a really high-level overview of the TIF evaluation chart, which I included in your packet, and I printed hard copies for you. It looks like this. But it just sort of provides an outline with how we review a TIF application when it's submitted to the city. And it's kind of a 4-section process where we look at section 1, which is a base requirement for project type. If a project meets one of the 6 items on that evaluation sheet, then we would say yes, and we would move on to section 2 and review section 2. But the way that our policy is structured currently, it has to meet each of these 3 initial steps before we would move on to step 4, which is the project evaluation criteria. So there has to be a yes in the right-hand column for at least one of the items within each section in order for it to move to the final project evaluation criteria. We do have language, though, within the policy that says the Common Council, in its sole authority, can approve or disapprove any TIF request as it deems appropriate, as long as they are allowed by state statute and the project plan. So there may be instances where the Finance Committee and the Common Council would feel comfortable straying from what is included in the TIF policy, and that is under the purview, obviously, of the Finance Committee and Council. But when we bring forward a request, we are reviewing it based on the language that is in the policy. And now I think I'll pass it to Bill to go over the details of section 3, which is financial feasibility considerations.
Yeah, so if we have a project and we look at it and the type of project is eligible, and then we look at the project costs and make sure those are TIF eligible costs that funding is being requested for. Then we move to the financial analysis process, and we're really looking at 2 things here. First of all, to look at the amount of increment that we're projecting to be generated and making sure there's sufficient increment to meet the TIF request. And we want to do that to both protect the city and the developer, because we don't want surprises after the project's built and either there's not enough increment to pay for what the city's expecting, or if we're using developer finance TIF assistance, that the developer is not getting enough increment to pay back their obligation under the developer financing. So we'll be looking at that, as well as trying to answer that but-for question for the project of, does this project need financial assistance, and what level of financial assistance is appropriate? So the steps that we will look at is we'll meet with the developer. They will submit information on their sources and uses of fundings and their project pro forma, including their revenue and expense projections. We'll review that with the city assessor. He both looks at that to determine what he would anticipate as the assessed value of the project so that we can estimate the future tax increment projections. And he also gets a lot of information from his assessment work to know what is typical in the market. So he will look at lease rates and cap rates and things like that to make sure that those assumptions are consistent with the market and provide that feedback. Based on that feedback, then I will put together an operating cash flow analysis that looks at the revenue and expenses for the project. It looks at the financing options and the terms of those financing, and then look at the rate of returns on that and provide that information typically in closed session to the Finance Committee. Finance Committee will review that information, provide any direction to staff in negotiating the amounts, and then as staff, we go back and work on negotiating the terms of the agreement. And then once there's conceptual approval on the overall terms, we'll work with the city attorney's office in preparing the actual TIF agreement. And some of the specific elements that we'll look at as part of that financial analysis and with that discussion with the Finance Committee, we'll look at the ratio of private equity to TIF incentive. Generally, we want to see at least as much private equity in the project as the amount of TIF assistance being requested. We'll look at the development fees as a percentage of the overall project cost. We'll look at the debt service coverage ratio, making sure that there's adequate revenue stream to cover the debt service and the borrowing for the project. And then we'll look at the project returns, either on a cash on cash or internal rate of return basis, but depending on the type of project, some measure to look at what the return is, both with and without the TIF, and evaluating that with the TIF assistance, that rate of return is in a typical range and not either too low where the project would not be viable, or at a level where we would say financial assistance is not required or not required to that same level for the project.
Bill, did you have
Switch
anything
back.
else to add?
Yeah, so nothing else on the presentation, but I guess just to wrap up, as we put together the information for this, as Abby mentioned, we looked at examples of other TIF policies within the Dane County area. I do think in looking at TIF policies, there are differences in different parts of the state depending on the market that you're in. So the area communities in the Dane County area are probably the most comparable. But there is a lot of flexibility within state law and within the guidelines of the project plan of where we want to prioritize our funding and how we want to review projects. And part of how Middleton's TIF policy was put together was looking at directions of the council and of the city of what things we wanted to prioritize, what things we valued, and what we were seeing in the market for what were typical costs as part of development and what are considered extraordinary costs that would be subject to TIF assistance. So that's kind of the background on where the policy was put together. I think with that, we'd be open for any questions or feedback from the committee for further examination of the policy.
Great. Thank you for the presentation, both of you. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Mayor?
Thank you. I want to say thank you to staff for sharing that and for asking for this discussion. What you all know is that staff worked with me to work on a TIF survey over the last year. And we looked at a certain segment of what we did over 10 years. And I will share that the 16 properties we looked at, they were all apartments. They started at an assessed value of about 15 million. I'm looking at Bill because they are his numbers. They are now worth 250 million, those 16 properties. Obviously, that is a goal, is to expand the tax base, but more importantly, infill our neighborhoods, especially on those transit lines, making sure things are safe and welcoming to people who work here or commuting, because maybe one works in Madison or Verona. And I think that's healthy. It does strike me because, and I look to the president, because I remember a few years ago, we were talking as a group about a second business, because we have our business district, and having a second campus. as a potential future layout. It's not something I've brought up to staff over the last year, so that might be something we want to, think about in the year to come. If there's a need to shift some interest, I always want to support the environment. I do, and I love what we do. I know there's times where we have to use it for soil contamination and redevelopment there. And I think there's a lot of value in that. The survey did show that there were some issues in some locations, and that happens in all over the world, right? Whenever you look at something and you look back, and some of those have resolved themselves. And I'm really proud of those owners who took those steps. But in saying that, I think there are some healthy discussions that we could maybe have in the months to come. And I know that it's 7 and I want to be respectful. But there was a interest in a comment. Is
Yes.
there-
And I'm mindful of, Gabby, don't leave yet. I have one question, and then I am going to allow Mr. Wall the customary 3 minutes for a public comment. Abby, what does it mean to enhance the urban greenway? Can you give an example of a project that does that?
So generally, TIF cannot be used for maintenance purposes, but if there were improvements to, for example, the creek corridor, that were new improvements that would enhance the greenway and support development within the TIF district because it helps to manage stormwater, a project like that may be eligible for TIF. The Confluence Pond project was funded entirely through TIF District 3.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Wall? And I don't have my, Bill, can you time?
Thank you very much. I've been involved at TIF for a long time. I extended TIF 3 by 10 years, and I also was the person who proposed the creation of TIF 5. So in Middleton, we're unique. I don't think you should take policies from other cities because Middleton is quite unique. You sit on an old lake bed, so there are bad soils and water table issues, contamination, et cetera, here that are unique to Middleton that you won't find in Fitchburg or other cities. You have a great downtown, and Middleton's been a leader for a long time, and I don't think we should look to other cities for the TIF policy. I do agree, though, that the TIF policy should be updated, but you should come up with guidelines and criteria. What I propose is a point score system. It's just a guideline so that developers and anyone asking for TIF has guidance on what they would receive in number of points based on the issues that they have. For example, Middleton does have, as I said, bad soils. You have high water tables. You have a lot of contaminated soil areas in development. In Middleton Center, where we received TIF, we also had unique extraordinary costs such as shoring up the roads, building demolition, tenant relocation, increased density, unique stormwater requirements. For example, if you do underground stormwater because you're trying to achieve the city's goals for density and redevelopment. TIF generally shouldn't be used for farm fields, green fields. For example, the Aviary project was a greenfield development. It lacked extraordinary costs, yet it received $10 million. Bell Farms also received $10 million, and it lacked extraordinary costs. Most of that was used for sustainable features. They did not reduce the cost of housing. Giving an example of Bell Farm, they're asking for $1.1 million for an 1,800 square foot box house. They're asking $370,000 for a lot, a very tiny lot. Those are prices that you'd pay for a golf course lot that's an acre in size, 10 times bigger. So sometimes TIF has been misappropriated, I believe, and I do agree that the policy should be updated, but it should be objective. And if you want workforce housing, for example, then you would assign a number of points for that. And then in your TIF agreement, you should require that since it's workforce housing, that the developer rent those units to people who work in Middleton rather than people who work and live in Illinois which is what's happening right now for the last few years. So you're not helping people in Middleton who work here, who can't live here, because a lot of those units are being rented to people from out of state. So you need to reinforce it all the way, not just in the policy, but in the TIF agreement with the developer as well. Each project that receives TIFs should have a demonstrated extraordinary need. Like I said, bad soils contamination, demolition of buildings.
That's 3 minutes.
It is? Okay. So I'll wrap up and just say, I'm going to hand out to you this proposed format. Again, it's up to you to decide what criteria, what points you want to assign, but it's a great way to communicate with people proposing to receive TIF. And that would guide us on exactly what your goals are. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wall. And thank you, Bill, for timing, and thank you for these visual displays.
Thanks.
At some point, when we have time, I'd like to come back to the issue of tenant relocation, because I think that is something I would like to see considered. Hadn't thought about that before. All right, no action is required on this. We can return to this discussion of our TIF policy at a future meeting. I'm not going to adjourn the Finance Committee because now we will move into our joint meeting. Alder Cole, would you care to join us? But we have reached the end of our Finance Committee agenda.
So I'm going to call the Personnel Committee to order. Do we need a roll call?
Yes.
Nelson,
Here.
Paul,
Here.
Jack.
Here.
Thank you. And let me get my agenda. Next on the personnel agenda is approval of the minutes from March 5th, 2024. If there are no corrections or questions, are there any? All right, the minutes of March 5th are approved.
For
Personnel.
Are there any corrections or comments on the minutes to our joint meeting of March 5th? Did we really meet? Oh, okay, yeah. I guess it's been a while. Are there any corrections? Hearing none, they are approved for or accepted for the Finance Committee. December 5th, I see it now.
All right, on to miscellaneous, the ordinance to consolidate the Finance and Personnel Committees.
Matt, do you want to do an introduction or you'd like me to do it or?
I certainly can. So we been directed to come up with an ordinance to combine the finance and personnel committees. And that is what you have before you. I think probably the biggest topic of discussion, policy discussion that came in this ordinance had to do with the number. What you'll see there is we ended up going with 3. Particularly because you're combining the committees, although it does not happen often, there is certainly circumstances where the personnel committee in particular may be called to have hearings, make decisions where having an even number could be very problematic. And so the current finance committee is 4. That left the choices of going to 3 or to 5. And so what you have before you was what L&O recommended was going to 3. There's some concern of that being a little light, but yet once you go to 5, you've got a majority of the council at that point. Now, that's not a huge problem from an open meeting standpoint. We could notice all the meetings that way, but then it becomes a matter of, well, things are just then really decided oftentimes by the finance committee rather than recommendations. So the rest of the ordinance really just is, once you've decided to make that change, is housekeeping, changing references, names, and so forth. Throughout chapter 3 and chapter 26. We did make sure in chapter 26 to go back and clarify that all the list of duties in chapter 26, that refers to just the duties with respect to personnel matters, because there's a whole host of duties that are found in chapter 3 that are finance matters. But that is about all there is to this.
May I ask what the effective date would be for the change?
Well, yeah, right, we talked about that. I mean, think the plan is, I don't currently have a effective date on there. But I would imagine what we would want to have it is effective, April.
Yeah, Madam Chair, so it'd be effective April 16th after this version of the council adjourns in finality and the new council has their organizational meeting that same evening. So basically that second council meeting is when it would become effective.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
How do we-
effective upon appointments of the new committee on April 16th.
It's too bad we can't say April 16th, but we can't because we still have a finance committee meeting.
Right.
Can't say April 17th because the mayor will be making appointments on this.
But yeah, I think we can just say that this would be effective for the new appointments to be made on April 16th.
Okay. Okay. And yes, I was at first surprised at the 3, but then, yeah, it's like 5 is definitely too many. 4 poses a potential problem, so 3 is.
The only benefit is your consent agenda would be very short or very big, and the council meetings could be very short.
Does anyone from personnel have any questions?
No, since I served on L&O, I've had plenty of time with this one.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
I did note some things in the ordinance that I just think they're not in the proposed amendment, but I think we might want to revisit these in the future now that I'm connected to the internet. But one thing is, it says, as a rule of the Common Council, all appointment recommendations shall be submitted to council members 7 days prior to the council meeting in which the confirmation vote is requested. And we all know that's not happening. And my thought is, should it happen? It probably could happen. But either way, if it's in there, we should be doing it. If it's not possible to do, we should take that out. And then also there was this paragraph, and maybe this is required in state statutes. Alder Cole mentioned this might be something that's required, but it says committee reports, each standing committee, which this is one of them, shall submit to the Common Council a written report of all matters considered by or referred to it. And that too is not something that's done. So I don't know, do the minutes constitute the written report?
I think they can, although typically if you have something considered by finance.
Right,
And
it's,
and
yeah.
then it goes right to council, you're not going to see a written report. But we can certainly go back and look and see what of that is required.
Yeah,
and
I would
see.
just flag those.
Yeah,
two
because again,
for-
that section was in there prior to us adding
Yeah,
the
it
ability
just
of the
really
council to
wasn't-
have a verbal discussion of committee actions, at the end of each council meeting, which I think gets to the same purpose.
Okay. Well, I would just flag those two for future looking at, because it.
Can you repeat the citations?
It's, okay, so it's chapter 1, and it's actually the second paragraph. What we're amending is the first paragraph, committee appointments. It's paragraph 2, committee reports.
So
That's where it talks about the written reports. And then the sentence I've read about the 7 days prior to the council meeting, that's when we would get the recommendations for appointments. That's in the paragraph that is kind of oddly following items 1 through 4. It's, oh yeah, actually you can see it here. It's in B.
Oh, I see, and now in B,
All
yeah.
committee appointments. Or as a rule of the Common Council, all appointment recommendations shall be submitted. Maybe we could strike that sentence if we don't think it's an actual rule that needs to be followed, or we could just strive to achieve that.
Be a reason why they had 7 days in there. Because we have to have public posting of our meetings 5 days before.
Well,
We don't have to discuss that one now. I just bring it up as,
We can take a look at it and bring back some.
thank you. Alder Jackson, like to make a motion?
This is Alder Jackson. I make a motion that we approve.
The,
So,
I gotta get to it.
Consolidation.
the consolidation of
Yeah, the ordinance to consolidate
the ordinance to consolidate finance and personnel committees.
with an effective,
Effective for new appointments on April 16, 2024.
yep, to be made on April 16th.
To be made with effective of new appointments to be made on April 16th.
Are you making this motion on behalf of personnel or finance?
Both.
Both.
He's
Because I
the,
sit on both.
he's the pivot point.
Do I have a second on personnel?
This is Cole. I will second.
Or I'm second for finance then.
Thank you.
All those in, before we vote, I just want to check with Brian W. You have any concerns about this?
I have no concerns with it. In the 4 years I've been here, I can count on one hand the number of times that we met solely as a personnel committee to deal with issues that were solely policy-based and had no financial impact. So this makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, personnel, all in favor?
Aye.
Saying aye?
Aye.
Aye.
And for-
Any opposed? None.
And for finance, all those in favor of the motion to approve the ordinance to consolidate finance and personnel signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. And with that, finance has reached the end of its agenda, so we stand adjourned.
Personnel is at the end of their agenda. And thus meeting adjourned.
Thank you.